He was a billionaire, young and powerful, yet he spent his whole life searching for the woman who saved his mother. And when he finally found her, she was 60, poor, and alone. What he did next shocked the world. When Ken was just 10 years old, he thought his mother was the strongest person in the world. She was his best friend, his hero, and the only family he had. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. One hot afternoon in Lagos, they were walking home from the market. The sun was high in the sky, and the streets were filled with the usual noise: honking cars, shouting traders, the loud hum of life. Ken held tightly to his mother's hand as they crossed the road. She was smiling, talking about the vegetables they had bought, when suddenly she stopped. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Then she dropped to the ground. "Mummy!" Ken shouted, panic rising in his chest. "Mummy, wake up!" People passed by, glancing for a second, then walking on like nothing was happening. Some slowed down, looked with pity, but didn't stop. Ken knelt beside her, shaking her arm with tears in his eyes. "Please help! Somebody help my mummy!" he screamed, his voice breaking. Still, no one came. Just when he thought all hope was gone, a woman came running from across the road. She was tall and graceful, with the kind of beauty that didn't need makeup or fancy clothes. Her eyes were sharp but kind. She bent down beside his mother and touched her neck gently. "She's breathing," the woman said softly, then turned to Ken. "Don't be scared. I'll help her." She lifted his mother's head and pulled a bottle of water from her handbag. She poured a little on her hands and dabbed it on his mother's face. Then she gently rubbed her palms, speaking softly. After a few tense moments, Ken's mother slowly opened her eyes. She blinked, confused, then sat up slowly with help. Ken cried harder, not out of fear, but out of relief. He hugged his mother tightly. The woman smiled and stepped back, giving them space. A few people had gathered now. Some began to ask questions, others just stared. But in the middle of all the noise, Ken turned to find the woman, and she was gone. He looked left, he looked right. He even ran a few steps up the street, but she had vanished, like a breeze that touched your skin and disappeared before you could turn. He never got her name. He never got to say thank you. But from that day, one thing became clear in Ken's heart. He would never forget her. And somehow, somewhere, he would find her again and repay her, no matter what it took. Many years had passed since that hot afternoon when Ken's mother collapsed on the street. Now, at 30, Ken was a man the world admired. He had built a tech company from the ground up, turning his small ideas into big solutions that helped people all over Nigeria and beyond. Investors respected him. Journalists called him Lagos's quiet genius. And everywhere he went, people wanted to shake his hand or take a photo. But Ken never cared much for the spotlight. He wore simple clothes. He drove himself sometimes, even though he had drivers. And instead of partying at night like many others in his circle, Ken often sat alone in his living room, staring at an old sketch tucked inside a brown notebook. The drawing wasn't perfect. After all, it was done by a 10-year-old boy, but it showed the woman's gentle eyes, her smile, and the scarf she had worn that day. He had drawn it the evening she saved his mother, afraid that if he waited too long, he might forget her face. But he never did. Not a single day went by without her passing through his thoughts. Ken's home was large and beautiful, sitting on a quiet street in Victoria Island. Yet despite all the space, it often felt empty. His mother now lived in London, enjoying a peaceful retirement, and though they spoke often, she still didn't know that Ken was looking for the woman who saved her. He never told her. It was his promise to keep. On weekends, Ken visited orphanages and hospitals, helping people without making any noise about it. He paid for strangers' surgeries, helped widows open businesses, and gave scholarships to children who had no one to help them. His staff admired him for his humility and kindness, but they didn't know why he did all of it. They didn't know about the woman. The truth was, even with all his money, power, and praise, Ken felt like something was missing. He had met many women, smart ones, beautiful ones, rich ones, but none of them touched his heart the way that mystery woman had touched it years ago. She didn't just save his mother. She gave him hope that there were still good people in the world. Sometimes at night, Ken would ask himself the same question. Where is she now? Is she still alive? Did she ever think of me? He would sit by the window with a glass of water, look up at the stars, and whisper, I haven't forgotten you. And somewhere in the busy, noisy heart of Lagos, that woman, now older and walking through life quietly, had no idea that the boy she helped all those years ago was still searching for her. The rain started without warning. 1 minute, the sky was calm. The next, it opened wide, pouring sheets of water over the city. Lagos traffic slowed to a crawl, horns blaring as people rushed for cover under trees, kiosks, and shop fronts. Ken sat in the back seat of his car, his driver carefully weaving through the flooded streets. He had just finished a long meeting on the mainland and was on his way back to his home on the island. As the car turned onto a narrow road near Ebute Metta, something outside caught Ken's eye. An elderly woman, no umbrella, soaked to the skin, was dragging 2 heavy shopping bags down the street. She looked like she was struggling to lift one foot in front of the other, her clothes clinging tightly to her small frame from the rain. Ken's heart tugged. "Stop the car," he said quickly. "Sir?" The driver looked confused. "Just stop." The car pulled over, and before the driver could grab an umbrella, Ken had stepped out into the downpour. "Ma!" he called out, jogging up to her. "Please, let me help you." The woman turned slowly, blinking through the rain. Her face was tired but kind. Her eyes, something about them stopped Ken in his tracks. They were soft, deep, and oddly familiar, like he had seen them somewhere before. "Oh no, I'm fine," she said gently. "I'm almost home." "You're soaked," Ken said, already lifting the bags from her hands. "Please, I insist. Let me at least walk you there." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "All right, thank you." They walked in silence at first, Ken holding the bags, the woman leading the way down a quiet street with puddles forming in every corner. "My name is Grace," she finally said. Ken looked at her. Grace, simple, elegant. The name suited her. "I'm Ken," he replied with a small smile. They reached a small building tucked between 2 larger ones. It looked old but clean, the front painted in faded yellow. Grace led him to the 2nd floor, where she opened a modest door into a tiny apartment. The inside was neat, with simple wooden furniture, a faded rug, and the smell of dried flowers and soap. Ken dropped the bags and looked around. Everything in the space felt warm, lived in, yet lonely. "I can make you tea if you'd like," she offered, taking off her wet scarf. "No, Ma," Ken said. "I'm okay. Just wanted to make sure you got home safely." She smiled, the kind of smile that came from years of endurance. "Thank you. People don't stop for strangers anymore." Ken paused. "You'd be surprised. Some still do." He handed her his business card. "If you ever need anything, please call me." Grace looked at the card, then at him again. "Ken, you're the one I see on TV sometimes, aren't you?" Ken nodded shyly. "Sometimes." She chuckled. "And yet you carried my bags through the rain." Ken smiled, but he couldn't shake the feeling in his chest. There was something about her presence, her voice, her hands, her calm way of speaking that felt like a memory he couldn't reach. As he turned to leave, Grace said softly, "Thank you again. May God bless you." "You too," Ken replied, his voice quiet. When he stepped back into his car, he sat still for a long time, staring out at the rain. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he had just met was the one he had been searching for all his life. After that rainy night, something shifted in Ken. He didn't plan it, but 2 days later he found himself driving back to Grace's house. He bought her a basket of fresh fruits and a small bouquet of yellow flowers. They were simple, nothing grand, but something told him she'd appreciate the thought more than the price. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, her eyes widened with surprise. "Ken?" she said softly, smiling. "You came back." "I hope I'm not disturbing," he replied. She stepped aside. "You could never be." From that day on, Ken began visiting Grace more often. Sometimes he came with groceries, other times with homemade soup from his chef. Sometimes he came with nothing at all, just a need to sit and talk with someone who felt real in a world that often didn't. Grace would make tea, and they would sit by her window, watching the people below go about their busy lives. They talked about everything. Ken spoke of his mother, how she had once collapsed on the road, and how a mysterious woman had saved her. He spoke of building his company, of the loneliness that sometimes followed success, of the pressure to be perfect in a world always watching. Grace listened quietly, nodding when needed, smiling softly when he tried to make her laugh. She spoke too, about her younger days, about the dreams she once had of becoming a school teacher or maybe owning a little sewing shop. "But life had other plans," she said with a sigh. Ken asked gently, "You never married?" She smiled sadly. Her eye came close once or twice, but each time, I was the one who gave too much. People took my kindness as weakness. They used me, then left when I had nothing more to give. Ken's chest tightened. "I decided I'd rather be alone than be someone's second option," she added. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth, a quiet kind of pain that had turned into wisdom. Ken sat back, staring at her as she poured more tea into his cup. Her voice, her eyes, even the way she moved, it all felt too familiar. He looked at her hands, noticing how she placed the cup down gently, with the same care he remembered from that long-ago day on the roadside. Could it really be her? He didn't say anything yet. He wasn't sure. But deep in his heart, something was beginning to stir, like an old song playing far away, calling him back to a memory he had never let go of. The sky was calm that evening. A soft breeze slipped through the open window of Grace's small living room. The tea on the table had grown slightly cold, but neither of them seemed to notice. Ken sat in his usual chair, one leg crossed over the other, listening as Grace spoke. She was telling a story, one that began like many others, but this time, something about it made his heart beat slow. "You know," Grace began, her eyes looking far away. "Years ago, I was walking home from work. I didn't have much then, just a few coins in my purse and tired feet. The sun was high, the street was full, and everyone was in a rush." Ken leaned forward slightly. She continued, "And then I saw this boy, crying in the middle of the road. His mother had collapsed. He was shouting for help, but people just passed by like they didn't see him." Ken's hands slowly lowered the teacup to the table. "I don't know what came over me," she said, her voice soft. "I just ran to them. I gave the woman water, held her hand, tried to wake her. She came around after a while, but before the boy could say anything, I left." Grace gave a small smile. "I didn't want to wait for people to start asking questions. I just knew they were okay, and that was enough for me. Silence, long and heavy. Grace looked at Ken. Why are you staring at me like that? Ken's throat tightened. His eyes began to sting. He swallowed hard, then whispered, "That boy was me." Grace blinked, confused. What? Ken's voice shook. That woman you helped was my mother. Grace's lips parted, but no sound came. I remember it all, Ken continued. Your scarf, your voice, the way you gently held her hand. You were gone before I could say thank you. I've spent my whole life searching for you. Grace put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide and shining with sudden emotion. Ken's eyes filled with tears. You saved my mother's life. You gave me back my world. Grace shook her head slowly, in disbelief. After all these years. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The air felt thick with emotion, yet peaceful, as if the universe had taken a deep breath and sighed with relief. Ken reached out and gently held her hand. I promised myself I would find you. I didn't know how. I didn't even know your name. But now, here you are. Grace wiped her eyes with the edge of her wrapper, still shaken. And I never thought I'd see that boy again. They sat there in silence, holding hands across a worn wooden table. Two souls from different times, now sitting side by side. Proof that some promises, no matter how long they take, are never forgotten. After the truth came out, something changed between Ken and Grace. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, like a gentle rain soaking into the ground. Every visit felt warmer. Every word between them carried more meaning. There was no longer a gap of mystery between them, only peace, and something else slowly blooming in the silence. Ken found himself looking forward to their evenings more than his boardroom meetings. With Grace, he didn't have to be Mr. Ken, the billionaire. He could just be himself. He would bring her small gifts sometimes, her favorite Zobo, a scented candle, or a soft scarf for her shoulders. They would sit side by side, talking about everything and nothing. He admired the way she spoke with grace, the way she chose her words carefully, like someone who had lived many lives and learned to listen more than speak. Grace had a way of making even silence feel full. "You're different from the others," she told him one day as they walked through a quiet part of town where old trees leaned over the road and the air smelled like rain. Ken smiled. "Maybe because the others didn't meet someone like you." She laughed softly, but her eyes remained serious. "You know people will talk," she said. "They'll look at you, then look at me, and wonder what you're doing with a 60-year-old woman who doesn't even own a car." Ken stopped walking. "I don't see your age," he said gently. "I see your heart, and it's the kindest heart I've ever known." Grace looked away, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. He continued, "I've been surrounded by wealth and beauty for years, but none of it ever made me feel what I feel when I'm with you." Grace placed a hand on her chest, unsure of how to respond. She had spent most of her life hiding parts of herself, too kind, too trusting, too used. And now, here was this young man, powerful and respected, telling her she was enough just as she was. Still, she hesitated. "Ken," she whispered, "I'm old enough to be your mother." He smiled. "Then thank God you're not, because I wouldn't know how to deal with these feelings." That made her laugh, a small, surprised laugh that broke through her fear. And in that moment, something in her heart softened. They didn't rush anything. There were no big declarations, no dramatic scenes, just long walks, shared meals, inside jokes, and quiet moments where they sat close and said nothing at all. But deep down, both of them knew what they had wasn't just friendship anymore. It was love, software, true, and the kind that only comes once in a lifetime. Love is beautiful, but the world often makes it difficult. At first, it was just between them. A few quiet smiles, a touch on the hand, the unspoken understanding that something real was growing between Ken and Grace. But nothing in Ken's life stayed private for long. One afternoon, as they walked out of a small cafe tucked in a corner of Surulere, a young woman with a phone raised it quickly and snapped a photo. Grace didn't notice. Ken did. He turned, but it was too late. By evening, the photo was already making rounds on social media. Billionaire Ken spotted holding hands with mystery older woman. Is this Ken's secret lover? She looks old enough to be his mother. Grace or disgrace? One cruel blog title read. The internet was on fire. At the office, whispers started. Some board members tried to act casual, but the concern crept into their voices. Ken, we're worried. This relationship, one of them said during a meeting. It's risky. People are asking questions. You're a young man, successful. She's 60, sir, another added, lowering his voice. She can't give you children. She has nothing to offer you. Even some of his close friends called to express their concern. Bro, is everything all right? One asked, trying to sound gentle. I mean, are you sure she's not using you? Ken listened quietly to all of it, but inside, his heart boiled, not with anger, but with sadness. How could the world see someone so kind, so full of life, and reduce her to just her age? Grace heard it too. She had seen the headlines. A neighbor even sent her one of the blog links with a snide comment. She didn't reply. But that evening, when Ken arrived at her apartment, her eyes were heavy. Ken, she said softly before he could sit. We need to talk. He froze. What's wrong? I think it's best if we take a step back. Ken's heart dropped. Grace, no, don't do this, he said, walking closer. I can't be the reason your name is dragged in the mud, she said. I've lived a full life, but you have so much ahead of you. People will never understand this. They'll never stop talking. I don't care what they say. You should, she whispered. You have a company to run, a reputation, a future. Ken took her hand, gently, firmly. You saved my mother, he said, his voice deep and full of emotion. And since then, I've been looking for a way to repay you. But Grace, it's not just about that anymore. You saved me too. You gave me peace. You gave me love. She looked down, trying to hold back tears. He stepped closer. Now let me save you from loneliness. Don't walk away because of noise from people who don't even know your name. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan above them. Grace finally looked up. You don't care about the world, do you? He smiled gently. I only care about the world when you're in it. And in that moment, though the storms outside raged with judgment and whispers, inside their small world, there was stillness, there was warmth, there was love. Ken had never been the type to do anything just for show. Even as a billionaire, he preferred things simple, meaningful, and quiet. So when he decided to ask Grace the most important question of his life, he didn't choose a fancy restaurant or a big hotel. Instead, he chose her home. That evening, Grace returned from her errands to find her small apartment glowing in a soft golden light. Dozens of candles flickered gently along the walls, and on the small wooden table near the window, a bouquet of fresh lilies rested beside 2 plates of warm food. Soft music played in the background, an old high-life tune she loved, one that reminded her of her youth. Ken stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing a calm smile and holding a bottle of her favorite fruit wine. "You did all this?" Grace asked, blinking in surprise. He nodded. "I wanted tonight to be special." They ate slowly, talking and laughing like always, but there was something different in the air. A kind of stillness, a kind of knowing. After dinner, Ken stood up and walked over to her side of the table. He knelt down slowly on one knee, took her hand, and held her gaze. Grace froze. "Grace," he began softly, "when I was a little boy, you saved my mother's life. I've never forgotten that. But what I didn't expect was that you would go on to save mine too." She covered her mouth with one hand, her eyes already beginning to water. "You've taught me how to slow down, how to listen, how to love without fear. And I know the world sees us and doesn't understand. But I don't care." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. A single gold band, nothing flashy, just beautiful, just enough. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said. "Will you marry me?" Grace stared at him, stunned. She shook her head slowly, tears now rolling down her cheeks. "Why would someone like you want someone like me?" she whispered. Ken smiled gently. "Because the world is full of beauty. But you, Grace, you are rare." Her chest rose and fell with quiet sobs. She had never imagined that love would find her like this, not at 60, not from someone so young, so full of life and promise. "But people will talk," she said softly. "They'll say awful things. They already are." He reached up and touched her face, wiping her tears. "Let them talk. We'll keep living." And in that moment, something inside Grace let go of the fear she'd held for years. The fear of being too old, too unwanted, too left behind. She nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "Yes." Ken stood up, pulled her into his arms, and they held each other tightly. Two souls who had waited a lifetime to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen. The engagement dinner was small, just like Grace preferred. Held at a quiet rooftop garden, surrounded by soft lights and blooming flowers, it felt more like a family gathering than a grand event. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over everything. Ken wore a simple white native outfit. Grace wore light blue lace, her silver hair wrapped neatly in a matching head tie. Her eyes sparkled, nervous but happy. Friends and close associates came. Some smiled genuinely, others smiled politely. A few whispered behind their glasses, "She's too old for him." He could have any woman. Why her? She must have done something to charm him. But the most surprising moment came when Ken's mother stood up to speak. She raised her glass and looked at Grace with kind eyes. "I was unconscious when you helped me," she said softly. "I never got the chance to thank you. But tonight, I can. You gave me life that day. And now, you've given my son peace. Grace, you have my full blessing." Gasps, silence, then applause. Ken reached for Grace's hand under the table. She squeezed it gently. A few weeks later, without much noise or attention, they were married in a small court ceremony. Just close family, no press, no camera flashes, just love. They returned home as husband and wife, simple, happy, fulfilled. Time passed quietly. The world moved on to other news. Ken and Grace lived peacefully in their little world, enjoying the warmth of each other's company. But one morning, Grace woke up feeling off. She had been tired for days, nauseous, emotional. At first, she thought it was stress or maybe a passing flu, but something in her spirit nudged her. She went to the doctor alone, not wanting to raise alarms. After the tests, the doctor looked at her, stunned. "Mom," he said slowly, "you're pregnant." Grace blinked. I beg your pardon?" The doctor laughed nervously. "It's rare, extremely rare at your age. But it's real. You're carrying a child." When she got home, Ken was in the study. She stood in the doorway, her face pale but glowing. "Ken," she said quietly. He turned, then rushed to her. "What's wrong?" She held out the test result. "I'm pregnant." He stared at the paper, then at her. His eyes welled up instantly. "Grace, are you serious?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. The doctor confirmed it. Ken dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed his face against her belly. "A miracle," he whispered. "A miracle born of love." That night, they sat in silence, hands resting over her stomach, hearts full. In a world that doubted them, judged them, and questioned their love, they had been given a sign, not just of life, but of possibility. The day Grace gave birth was quiet and bright. The sky over Lagos was a clear, endless blue. Doctors and nurses moved carefully around the room, amazed at what was happening. A 60-year-old woman, glowing with strength and grace, lay calmly on the hospital bed, holding her husband's hand. Ken stayed by her side the entire time. When the baby finally arrived, there were no cries from the crowd, only the gentle sound of a newborn's first breath and the soft sobs of a man who had waited his whole life for this moment. "It's a boy," the nurse whispered, placing the baby gently in Grace's arms. Ken leaned over, his heart thudding with joy. He kissed her forehead and looked down at their son. Tiny, warm, perfect. "We did it," Grace whispered. Ken nodded, tears falling freely. "Yes, and he'll know the full story one day." The news broke within hours. 60-year-old bride of billionaire gives birth to healthy baby boy. Ken and Grace's unbelievable love story inspires a nation. A miracle child, born from a promise made years ago. Some were shocked, some laughed, many cried, but most were touched. People from all walks of life reached out, writing letters, sharing stories, sending gifts. Not because of the money, but because of the message. That love, real love, could still exist in a world full of doubts. Ken continued to grow his company, but his heart remained grounded. He invested more into his charity work, quietly building schools, funding health centers, and creating job opportunities, always in Grace's name. "She taught me how to care deeply," he told reporters once. "Everything I do now carries a piece of her soul." Grace, on the other hand, used part of their wedding gifts and support from friends to open a women's shelter. She called it Second Chance. It wasn't just a name, it was a belief. She filled the small compound with beds, warm meals, and a library filled with books. She held counseling sessions and mentored young girls who had been hurt or forgotten by life. "I was once where you are," she told them, "but love found me, and so will hope if you stay open to it." Their son, whom they named Emmanuel, meaning God is with us, grew up surrounded by stories of grace, courage, and kindness. From an early age, he knew that his parents' love was rare. He saw the way Ken looked at Grace like she was a gift sent from heaven, and the way Grace laughed whenever Ken walked into a room. Their home was full, not just of love, but of purpose. Years later, when Emmanuel stood in front of his schoolmates during a graduation speech, he said, "My mother was 60 when she gave birth to me. My father was one of the richest men in the country, but none of that is what made their love special. What made it special was that it was real." and the room fell silent. Because even then, the world hadn't forgotten the story of a little boy who made a promise, and the woman who never knew she'd become the answer to it.